everybody, global warming skeptic here. And first of all, I'd like to say rest in peace, Bernie Sanders. And I got a little something to say to all the Bernie supporters out there. Two things: stop your crying, stop your bawling, just stop. You guys have done this to yourselves through your violence, through your ignorance, through your denial, through your refusal to listen to people who are older than yourselves. You had every opportunity. The system did not cheat you. You cheated yourselves. That aside, let me just say a little something about CNN and other media outlets. And this is the one thing that Bernie supporters do have right. No, it's not an excuse for losing the election, but the reality is media entities like MSNBC and CNN, they are crying shame with how they've handled the situation. Constantly trying to put pressure on Bernie Sanders to drop out because of his narrative. Now, I agree it's stupid for him to stay in the race, but he has every right. He's got the money, people want to listen to him. Let him talk. Let him talk. Because, like it or not, there are people who want to hear him. And just as it is wrong that Bernie supporters try to block Trump supporters at Trump rallies, so the same thing is wrong that the media is trying to shove their agenda upon Bernie Sanders just to push this narrative of this making history for Hillary Clinton, which isn't really history because we've had female leaders. This has been done already. People, they just want to pretend every moment is a historic moment. But this is just reality. And there's nothing historic about it. Hillary Clinton is no different than any other politician, including Bernie Sanders. And the reason why I'm supporting Donald Trump is because it's the very thing that we need to get rid of. We need somebody that will, for example, put in place a congressional term limit. Same thing as the president, no more than 10 years in Congress. That's combined House and Senate. We shouldn't have these 20, 30, 50-year fat cats sitting in Congress. See, that's where you get deadlock because these people with their ultra safe seats, what do? They're not going to change their vote. They're not going to compromise. They're going to play a hard line on the major issues, and there will be gridlock unless there's money to be made by both sides. But I want to cover something more broad. And more importantly, I want to teach all of you Bernie supporters about economics. I'm not going to play this video, but here is an important video: Bernie Sanders versus Milton Friedman on healthcare. It's a pretty good general video that you guys would like and inspire me to make this specific part. And I want to explain libertarianism to you guys. Now, before I explain, let me explain what it isn't, and we're going to debunk some things. So, first of all, what is libertarianism not? It's not anarchy. Most libertarians don't believe that there should be no government, unless you're talking about stateless libertarians, but those are basically anarchists. They're not true libertarians. So libertarians aren't anarchists, and they're not socialists, and they're not for the status quo. Libertarians want the government out of wars and out of people's lives, which means lower military spending, no NSA. But it's important to understand this too. The socialist programs that you Bernie supporters are for facilitate the increase of the programs that you are against. This whole notion that you can be libertarian and on the left is incorrect. Yeah, there's the grid and it's on my avatar, but it's not a true grid because if it were a true grid, it would be very, very warped. I can't really describe the shape, but important thing is this: socialism is necessarily authoritarian. Necessarily. So, for example, you say you want free healthcare. Well, okay, so you got two choices. You either make people work for free, or you get somebody else to pay for it. For example, the rich raise taxes on the wealthy. So what is the mechanism by which you force this behavior? How do you force people to pay taxes? The ultimate result is you get authorities who will beat down someone's door with a gun. That's the ultimate result. And say, pay your taxes, get locked in a cage, or we're going to kill you. All government action is backed up by force. All government action. If it's not voluntary, it's backed up by force. And so, you're either forcing healthcare workers to work for free, slave labor, and if they don't work for free, people with guns bust down their doors and they get arrested. So, okay, so you say, well, they have a choice. They don't have to be healthcare workers. Well, tell me how many people are going to work for free when they got a family to feed, when they have other priorities in life, other wants. No one's going to do that. Nobody. And you've seen with a lot of the strong arming, the regulations, you've seen a lot of businesses, they're not accepting a lot of clinics, they don't accept Medicare or Medicaid. And there's videos, I couldn't point out where they are to you, but look it up on YouTube. I think there's a really good let's see, what's it called, PowerPoint presentation. It's a really good PowerPoint presentation explaining the decline in since Obamacare in doctors accepting Medicare and Medicaid. So you got people who won't work for free. Well, most people say, well, okay, we'll just tax the rich. Well, it's the same thing. It's the rich pay taxes. Taxes aren't voluntary. They don't pay taxes, get their doors beat in, and they go to jail. And so, what's going to happen? Are they going to pay those taxes normally? No, they're going to leave the country. But see, that's not the point. The point is that you can't be authoritarian and socialist at the same time. And this goes with all sectors, by the way. And so, libertarianism is the removal of force. You either have to accept these other authorities, which are created to enforce the laws made by socialist policy, or you embrace freedom, get the government out. Now, but there's a limit to this. And sometimes I think conservatives go too far. A lot of libertarians go too far in how little involvement you can give the government. Because you can't have no government. And I don't even think it's practical to have a super, super small government. But here is a big guideline to follow. You think of a nuclear reactor. A nuclear reactor has to be in balance to provide optimal power for people. If a reactor is running too cool, there's not enough steam, turbines don't turn, and power is not provided to the masses, and the reactor can shut down. Too hot, and you lose the ability to cool down the reactor, where it could go into meltdown. Now, so you have to have a balance between those two. And the economy kind of works the same way. If you have a government that is too large, a government that is equivalent to, say, critical mass of nuclear material, then that government is unstoppable no matter what you do. Just as in a nuclear reactor, where if it gets too hot, there is no way to cool it down. You can't stuff fuel rods, you can't fill it with water. It gets to a critical mass where the government does, where it becomes impossible to control. It's going to keep growing, 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 and it's out of the control of the people. And we may even be at that point right now. I don't know. But you have that. And of course, you have too little government where it's failing to provide a security net for other people, and thus infrastructure becomes disorganized. There are certain people who will die horrible deaths on the streets. And so you need a government that is small enough to control, yet large enough to provide just enough security so that people can survive, and just enough of a push of infrastructure so that the private sector can grow and thrive in a business friendly environment where even those who fail are going to live, they're going to be okay. And see, another effect of too much government is you get just the same thing that happens if there's too little. You get to the point where the money, the amount of money that takes to run the system becomes so gargantuan that there's nothing left for the people. And see, this all gets eaten up in cost. Like, if you look at various rust belts in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Indiana, even as far as Chicago, there is a saying, at least it's in Toledo, Ohio, which is where I'm from. It's a saying called construction mafia. What does that mean? It means that the cost of construction is so extremely high because the bureaucrats in the construction company, neither one has any motivation. The government has no motivation to pay less, and the construction companies, the contractors, have no reason to charge less because the government will pay the price. And so what you get is you get something called racketeering, which is where they work together, and who gets screwed? The taxpayer. So if you look at a city like Toledo or Detroit, because it's the same thing there too, you get something called a levy passed. A levy is basically where the citizens vote on a one time large tax on the whole city based on a percentage of income, and that levy is used to pay for construction, road repairs, etc. So you get lots of levies, lots of high taxes, lots of business taxes. But look at the city. Look up somebody on YouTube called Econ Cat 88. He has a very good channel, many dozens of videos driving through the city of Toledo, and you will see how decrepit those roads are. It is horrible. Look up people driving through Youngstown, Ohio, as another example. Just horribly maintained roads. So you get liberals in control with high taxes, high welfare, low capital, and nothing gets done. And so I guess this is a long winded way of saying that if you go too big of government, what do you get? You get no private investment, and so you get an explosion of inflation. Same thing. Well, with too little government, you get low level of security. So you got to have a small government, but a manageable government, small enough to be managed. And there's another dynamic to this too, and this just gets lost in all the debate. Is we need to have more local control, state, county, city government control. And we need the control to go away from the federal government in terms of dictating local policy. Now, of course, liberals, a lot of them, will counter this with, well, who's voting for city councilman? Or what's to stop a local government from disobeying the Constitution? And to that I say, well, what stops them now? Because they're doing it all the time anyhow. So, I don't think federalization of all the services is really helping in that regard. But it's important to realize that things can be handled much more efficiently at the local level. Perhaps with a skeleton of involvement from the state level and very basic involvement from the federal government. Like, for example, with our highways, you can have the federal government lay out a grid of highways. They lay out the schematic. That's all they do. No money needs to be invested by them. All they do is say, this is the desired national grid for our highways. Now go and build them. And then you have you could have the states take that schematic and divvy out responsibilities to the various cities. Perhaps they could help with funding at the state level. Perhaps they could leave it to the local level. I wouldn't know specifics, but it's a general idea. You know, it's the local government's responsibility to build the highways on top of the framework that is laid by the nation. And then the local governments can be the ones to raise the money to build these things. And perhaps the states can build in the rural areas or whatever. It's like, these things can be handled, much of them, at a local level. That's just one example, though. There's many examples. But the point I'm trying to get at is even a seemingly national issue such as highways can be handled at a local level. But there are definitely things that are locally handled that should be kept local. For example, you have entitlements. Now you have a local office in virtually every city. So why can't we take the next step and say each city can provide its own social services and have its own set of qualifications to meet those services? There's no reason for federal government to be doing things like having social security, setting minimum wages, unemployment insurance, etc. These are things that need to be handled at a local level. So here's the take home from all of this, Bernie supporters, and I hope you've been taking notes. Three things. Number one, your big government nonsense has to stop, especially at the federal level. Number two, we are not saying by any means that there should be no government. There definitely should be a government. And if you want the NSA and you want the FBI, you want demilitarization of the police, you want more freedoms, you want civil liberties, then you have to concede that you can't have these authoritarian socialist policies which require more and more enforcement from these various agencies that you want to demilitarize. So we're not saying no government. Number three, what government there should be needs to be local. Local where possible, federal only when there's no other choice. Not the first choice. Not have leverage programs such as the Interstate Highway Fund, but have a true local structure of small and large towns where people could live in the place that best fits their desires. You can have more towns with more entitlements. You can have towns that use a more capitalist structure. But you can't force one system on a whole nation and expect it to work. So hope you've been listening, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you for listening. God bless. I'll have more for you later.